Well, welcome and thank you for being here. It was probably one of the first days when President Janet Napolitano came on as president of the University of California that she and I had a long talk. And that talk, in many ways, was informed by our common experience as prosecutors. And you'll remember that she was the former Attorney General as well. And we were talking about many of our collective and shared priorities, including a commitment, a longstanding commitment, to ensuring that victims of sexual assault are given dignity and protection and a voice in the system. So we agreed that day that we would collaborate and work together to combine the resources of the California Department of Justice, resources that are available in the community, the resources of local prosecutors like Mike Ramos and Nancy O'Malley, to work on improving our collective ability to address and respond to the needs of victims of sexual assault on our college campuses, and to do the work of also ensuring that there will be accountability and consequence for offenders. So the work that we are announcing today was born out of that conversation quite some time ago, but we are here today after many months of working collaboratively, not only between the California Department of Justice and the University of California, but also local law enforcement, community folks who have been doing this work every day, victim advocates, and all those who have an interest or experience or stake in the outcome. So you're going to hear from several of us who are standing before you about the work we have done and the significance of this work. So I want to thank everyone who is here, and I'll introduce them before they each speak. As a career prosecutor, I personally, when I was a line prosecutor in the Alameda County DA's office, personally in courtrooms prosecuted sexual assaults. I have had the unfortunate occasion over my career then and as the elected district attorney of San Francisco and now as Attorney General to literally hold the hands of victims of sexual assault and to talk with them about their experiences. And one thing is very clear. When they have the experience of having been assaulted in that way, it is an extremely traumatic experience. And it is also clear that often the perpetrator is someone who lives in their environment, works in their environment, and is possibly, sometimes probably, someone they have met before and someone they know. What we also know is that the vast majority of victims of these types of crimes, of these types of assaults, are reluctant to report what has happened to them. They're reluctant for a number of reasons. They're reluctant because in the history of our country in dealing with these cases, we have gone through the sad and unfortunate times where some of our first reactions were to blame the victim. They are reluctant because oftentimes there is someone who will question whether they invited the crime upon themselves. They are reluctant because they may feel that they will be judged and in some way isolated because of the experience that they had that they did not cause upon themselves. So for all of those reasons, and with that knowledge, we have approached and have arrived at the MOU that we are going to describe to you today, understanding the very experience that the victims have, and also understanding the challenges we have as government, and I'll let President Napolitano speak to this in more detail, the challenges we have as institutions, such as the extraordinary institution of the University of California, to unravel and unpack a bureaucracy in a way that we meet the needs of these individuals. And so part of the work that we have done is to acknowledge that there are silos in our system, and we need to break through those to do the best work we can to give these victims dignity and give them a voice. So let's talk about some of the facts. Studies suggest that as many as 1 in 5 undergraduate women have been the victim of sexual assault. Those same studies tell us that approximately 80% of sexual assaults against students go unreported. We also have information that tells us that 9 out of 10 sexual assaults against students are by a perpetrator who has committed a sexual assault before. And I can tell you, partly that statistic is attributable to the fact that when someone can commit a crime and know they can get away with it, they feel a bit emboldened and are more likely then to recommit that crime. So what we know is that when we are stuck in silos, and in particular we're going to talk about the silos that exist between the structure that is our college campus systems, and it relates not only to UC, it's Cal State, it's our city colleges, it's our community colleges, but we understand that there is a silo that exists around that structure and a separate silo that exists around law enforcement. So again, this MOU acknowledges that and seeks to combine the resources that we collectively have in a way that we are talking with each other in the best interest of the students. So I have two stories to share with you. One is the story of this year, a 19-year-old Mills College, which is a women's college in Northern California, who came forward to share her story. She met an individual, a young man, at a party. They exchanged telephone numbers. They texted for a few days. He visited her on campus one afternoon, and they went to her dorm room where he brutally raped her. She did not feel comfortable reporting it immediately, but after 2 days, built up the courage to go on campus and was taken to the hospital to basically do what is necessary in the uncomfortable experience of submitting to a rape kit, which is essentially the forensic work that is done to determine if there is medical and physical evidence that can be used in a court of law in terms of the consequence and accountability. So she was told after the rape kit, after she submitted to the rape kit analysis, that a detective would contact her within a month. But instead, her case fell through the cracks. A month went by and she never heard from the police. She had to hire an attorney to help her navigate the process and track down the detective who was in charge of her case. Finally, she called the officer herself. And when she finally met with him, their place of meeting was a windowless interrogation room where she had to endure questions about her virginity and an insinuation that she was confusing rough sex with rape. What this story makes clear is that the burden in that case was on the victim each and every step of the way to navigate the system. What is clear from that story, and it is a true story, is that there was inadequate coordination between the folks on campus and the folks who are in the police department. What is clear about that story is there was no victim-centered response. There was no response that allowed her to be in an environment where she could trust that she could tell her story without judgment. And at the end, she stated, "I wish I had never reported my rape." That's not the signal we want to send. Another example, and this is a case that was prosecuted by the Associate Attorney General, and her name is Venus Johnson. Where are you? Right there. That she personally prosecuted in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. It was a case that occurred between 2005 and 2009 on the University of California, Berkeley campus. Essentially what happened is the perpetrator was an all-American athlete who sexually assaulted 2 female Berkeley students. When one of the victims reported the incident to campus police, she found herself being interrogated instead of interviewed. She was bounced around from one campus office to another, because remember, we're talking about a Title IX office. Separately, we're talking about campus police. Separately, we're talking about the disciplinary office that exists on most university campuses. So she found herself being bounced around and at each point having to describe what had occurred to her, to describe the rape. She then had to go home not knowing what was going to happen with the case. The second victim later had the same experience. Never were the victims informed that their case would be forwarded to the DA. So when Venus Johnson reached out to those victims, because the case was referred for prosecution, they had no idea that the case was going to court. They had no idea that they'd be called to testify in a court. And it required then that they would be in a system over which they had no control and no information, re-victimizing them in that they again felt that they were powerless in a situation that potentially could harm them or at least be uncomfortable. Luckily, that case ended up being prosecuted, and the perpetrator was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. But again, it makes clear this case that there was no clear collaboration between campus officials, there was a lack of compassion during the process, and there was a failure to adequately advise the victim of her rights. Sadly, these cases are not unique, and what you may know is that currently 11 California colleges and universities are under investigation by the United States Department of Education in its Office of Civil Rights. So that brings us to the occasion of being here today. As leaders in law enforcement and higher education, we have agreed that we must and can do better for these victims and all students who are on these college campuses. We know and we are proud of the fact that California is home to some of the best educational institutions in the world. We take great pride on, through those institutions, having produced Nobel laureates, scientists, technologists who are changing the way that the world works and improving life for so many people. And let's also remember what it requires of an individual, a young person, to be admitted to those universities and colleges. A lot of hard work, a lot of self-determination. We have many students who are in those colleges and universities who are first in their family to graduate high school and go on to college. So many of those students are enduring incredible debt to receive that education. Their families are mortgaging or second mortgaging their homes to pay for that tuition. And they are doing it all because we know that the education they will receive there will result in incredible value not only to that student, but to all of us in the community and in society. And what happens? During the course of that, during the course of living their dream of being the next Nobel laureate, they're raped. A sexual assault occurs. And so we're talking about something that not only is about a crime, it's about a situation that occurs to someone who is on their path to living the dream their family has of them and the dream they have of themselves. And in that way, what we know is that we must provide a safe environment for them, because that student is not only valuable in terms of who they currently are, but they are valuable in terms of California's future and the future of our country. So specifically, this is what we have done. Last summer, we started collecting best practices, and my office met with students, we met with faculty, we met with higher education experts, we met with law enforcement to hear their stories and to compile their experiences so that we could make sure that this MOU would actually be relevant. We also, in January, released an information bulletin out of my office outlining to law enforcement and educational institutions a new law that has taken effect in California in January that requires that universities and colleges report sexual assaults to law enforcement. And today, then, we are proud to introduce the MOU, and specifically I'll highlight 3 points that the MOU achieves. One, it clarifies each party's responsibilities. So it clarifies who is responsible for collecting evidence. Who is responsible for interviewing the witnesses? Is it college campus police, or is it the local police department or sheriff's office? Who is responsible for arranging for the victim to receive a health exam or to undergo the rape kit? Who informs the victims of their rights? Clarifying responsibilities. Second, it puts the needs of victims first. Specifically, we have again, outlined already, the need for college campuses and law enforcement to work directly to make sure that community-based organizations are folded into the interaction with the victim so that we can get her victim assistance, we can get her the hand-holding she needs to take her through the process. And then finally, one of the important aspects of the MOU is that it is designed to prevent future assaults. This is not only about reacting to an assault after it occurs, it is designed to prevent future harm, and in particular by making sure that victims and perpetrators know that there will be collaboration and coordination with a mind not only to giving the victim dignity, but to ensuring accountability and consequence for the perpetrator. And then one very important aspect of this MOU is very significant, a perhaps overlooked detail, but incredibly significant. Adherence to this MOU requires that law enforcement will collect and test rape kits. And that needs to be said. Again, collect and test. We are not going to allow rape kits to sit on a shelf and gather dust, because that can result, obviously, in a lack of response and a lack of coordination and a lack of then accountability and consequence. So in conclusion, I want to say that what I think this work that we have done today makes very clear is that we are going to make real the promise of Title IX. And remember what Title IX outlines. It says that we must provide equal access to education, free from discrimination, harassment, or violence. And that's what this MOU is designed to do. So with that, I want to introduce and thank President Janet Napolitano of the University of California for her leadership. And please.
Thank you. I'll just say a few words, and I want to thank you, Attorney General, and your wonderful office for working with us on this, because it has been a team effort. And to my knowledge, California is the first state in the country to have executed such an MOU at the statewide level. And it will give California survivors, I think, greater confidence that perpetrators will experience consequences for their actions. We have no tolerance for sexual violence or sexual harassment on our campuses, absolutely none. That is the promise of Title IX. And we have taken a number of steps over the last year to give meaning to that promise. What the MOU does is, as the Attorney General just described, is break through what can be a very complicated web of different organizations and offices that might have jurisdiction when a rape or a crime of sexual violence occurs. What it makes clear is that there will be training. What it makes clear is that there will be designated points of contact. In addition, at the University of California, we now have independent advocates on every campus to help survivors as they go through the process. What it makes clear is that evidence will be collected and kept in the right way so that prosecution decisions can ensue. And what it makes clear is that when we're talking about the university environment, be it public university like the University of California, or indeed extending to community colleges, the CSU system, and private colleges, universities within the state of California, that there is now a roadmap, an almost add water and mix MOU understanding that can be then executed with whichever local police department or local DA's office is involved. So we don't have to go through the business of everybody negotiating their own and figuring out the right language and what complies with state law, et cetera. All that work already has been done. And that, for the institutions that have not yet executed MOUs, that should speed that process as well. So again, Attorney General, thank you and your staff for being willing to take a leadership role on this.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have San Bernardino County District Attorney Mike Ramos.
Thank you. Thank you, Kamala. I want to thank you, and I really want to thank our Attorney General in the state of California, Kamala Harris, who is leading the country in this issue. I want to thank her for including me as part of the team, and she also included experts in this field my colleague Nancy O'Malley, her staff is here, who couldn't be here today, who did a tremendous amount of work in putting this protocol and MOU together, a strategic plan on how we're going to handle this issue that we're all thinking about, talking about across the country, United States of America, and that's combating this sexual assault on our institutions of education. And I think we've come up with a great, great plan in MOU. The three-pronged approach that I see, and the number one priority, and the Attorney General's already mentioned it, is victims. And victims and how we are going to approach them in the future to allow them to feel comfortable in reporting what has occurred to them. And in some of the worst cases, rape, kidnap, these cases that we have seen, what can we do to assist victims? You see, too many times in our society we tend to blame, I don't know what reason, but in this crime we tend to blame the victims. In my days of a trial attorney in a rape case, defense attorneys, even though they knew it was prohibited, would try and cross-examine my victim and ask them about prior sexual conduct and acts, which is absolutely irrelevant. These are the dynamics and the biases that we need to change in the state of California and the United States of America. Because these young women and sometimes young men are survivors. And you're going to be very fortunate today to meet a survivor today in Savannah. I got to meet her for a few minutes before we got out of here. Amazing. But this is the dynamic that we need to change, and this protocol and MOU will do that. Secondly, we need to do a better job of a collaborative approach to the investigations. This MOU is going to connect our campuses, our police departments, our educators with law enforcement, with district attorneys' offices. I've made a commitment in my county, our district attorney's office will be involved in our state campuses and in our junior colleges. I'm going to have lawyers assigned because of what we've created here today. So we need to do a better job of training across the board in this cooperative approach. Thirdly, prevention. Kamala Harris has already mentioned it. But this is a key aspect. And we that sit in law enforcement and adults, we can do that. We can train. We can get to students, the campuses, student orientation. But it's really student to student. It's really the Savannahs of the world that get out there and start talking to one another about what to do, what not to do, eyes and ears for your fellow students. That's going to be absolutely key as we move down this path. So I want to thank the president of our universities for making this a priority and opening the doors to ensure a safe learning environment for the students of the state of California and our college campuses. And again, I want to thank our Attorney General, who continues to be a leader in victims' rights, whether it's sexual assaults on campuses, human trafficking, and any of the other areas that she's led us in this great state of California. And now we have a model for the United States of America. Thank you.
Next, we have the Chief of Police of UCLA, James Herron.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here today and represent those of us in law enforcement who have for a long time grappled with this very difficult situation. We in law enforcement have a long history of doing our best to deal with difficult, challenging crimes that have occurred. But honestly, we know that we can do better too. And I think one thing that this model will do for us that has been created will help us, give us a guideline and a template for making some improvements to the way we investigate sexual violence and sexual assaults. This is a really significant and noteworthy day today where we have so many influential institutions in our state coming together with the Attorney General, the President of the University of California, our district attorneys across the state, and police leaders throughout the state of California, working along with victim and survivor advocates, working to really try to stem this tide on our college campuses. What we have heard already today about this toolkit, the MOU, will go a great ways for us in police work to do a better job in addressing these situations. We have realized in law enforcement that working with young ladies and young men who are victims of sexual violence and sexual assault is not easy. It's not easy for them to come forward. And one of the things that we need to do is build a better rapport, better relationship with these individuals so they're comfortable coming to a police officer who can sometimes be a little bit off-putting in a uniform. But we need to break down the barriers and build trust, because that'll be the foundation for us being able to do our jobs better. In the MOU, in the toolkit, it does, as you've already heard, bring together a lot of resources, and believe me, the state of California has some tremendous resources for being able to help survivors to overcome this situation, and also for being able to find out who the perpetrator was in an incident, in a crime of violence, and bring that person to justice. As I mentioned, this is a significant day today for us, and I'm very proud and very pleased to be here. I thank the Attorney General, President Napolitano, the district attorneys, and police leadership throughout the state, along with survivor and victim advocates, for making this happen. Thank you. Thank you.
And finally, we have Savannah Badalich, who is a student at UCLA and the founder of 7,000 in Solidarity, a campaign against sexual assault. And I just want to say that she is incredibly courageous and a real role model for many of us, and in particular for students in California. So Savannah, come on up.
Hello. So in addition to being a UCLA student and also the founder of 7,000 Solidarity, I'm also a representative on the UC Presidential Task Force on this issue, and I'm also a survivor of sexual violence by a friend and fellow Bruin at the beginning of my sophomore year at UCLA. After coming out to the Daily Bruin, our daily newspaper at UCLA, about my sexual assaults and creating the campaign about 2 years ago, I've had hundreds of survivors from not only my campus but other campuses talk to me about their sexual assaults, or talking to me about their experiences before coming to college and their sexual assaults. And there are many reasons why survivors do or do not report. And I talked to the ones that reported, didn't report, why they reported, why they wouldn't, and if they did report, what happened well and what didn't go well. For survivors who report, there's two traumas that they experience. One is the experience of their sexual assault itself, and the other is having to relive that sexual assault, sometimes for months if you're going through the campus adjudication process, oftentimes for years if you're going through the criminal justice system. And for survivors who don't report, like myself, we have many reasons why we don't. It could be the stigma of feeling like you're considered weak, the shame or feeling like you were somehow culpable in your own assault. There's many different reasons, but oftentimes, like myself, one of the reasons I didn't report was seeing how others were treated while they were reporting. Oftentimes when survivors go through the reporting process, they have to tell their story over and over and over again to so many different individuals. It could be the Title IX coordinator, it could be the dean of students, it could be a detective, it could even be a counselor or care advocate, your professor. It's having to relive that over and over and over again. Oftentimes survivors don't want to get out of bed, let alone go to class. Their educational experiences are often hindered, and they tend to drop out, or if not, their education suffers. So as a survivor who didn't report, seeing them go through that process makes me not want to report, makes other survivors not want to report. And there are other things that go into that as well. Oftentimes with law enforcement, they don't have a trauma-informed approach. So, I mean, we heard in other terms that it could be asking about past sexual history. It could be asking about if this was the first time you ever drank, if you were a virgin before this, all of these other things. And even if you do go through with an investigation and the local law enforcement provides it to the district attorney, many times the district attorney won't take it up because it doesn't look like a beautiful case that will have an easy conviction. It's not a sympathetic survivor or the perfect victim. Many times they're men who experience sexual violence, women who experience it while intoxicated, by someone that you knew, a friend. These are many different reasons why survivors won't go through, because even if they decide to go through that hard process, if you're not going to actually have it go through prosecution, what's the point of even going through it? So you have all these survivors who at the end of the day don't want to report, or they regret the fact that they did report, because their mental health is in a state after they reported that was worse off than what it was before. That being said, I'm really excited about this MOU as a first step towards hopefully bringing these different resources together. So as a survivor that experiences sexual assault off of campus and talks to local PD, hopefully they'll connect them with the campus resources and accommodations on campus. If you're on campus, you should be educated on what your rights are if you decide to go through the criminal justice system. And many times these perpetrators graduate and they perpetrate off of campus. So we really do need to take this seriously. So thank you so much for all of your work and your history of doing this for survivors and victims. And for any survivors or victims who are listening to this, whether you report or not, you're brave, you're not alone, and that there's a lot of work being done to help you. Thank you.
Thanks, Savannah.